If you haven't already rated and reviewed the Single Tracks podcast in your podcast app, now's the time to do it. We're randomly selecting listener reviews to read on the show, and if we choose yours, you'll get a free Single Tracks hat in the mail. Hit pause right now, write a quick review, and then listen to future episodes to find out if you won yourself a hat. Happy trails. Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Gene Hamilton. Gene is a former pro downhill racer who created one of the first mountain bike skills courses in the late 1990s. Today, Better Ride hosts clinics all around the U.S. teaching regular riders and pros alike how to ride faster. Thanks for joining us, Gene.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get into mountain bike racing?
Well, that's kind of a funny story. So I was a professional, or trying to be a professional snowboard racer. I mean, I basically, like a lot of professional mountain bikers, like me when I was a professional mountain biker, I quote was a professional, but I wasn't getting paid,
Right.
you know.
Well, that was all you did, so that made you a pro,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
I
And
might call it a
I
ski
competed.
bum or a snowboard bum.
Well, and I did well in competitions, but they didn't pay enough to pay the rent, you know.
Right.
So got my first mountain bike in 1989, and then I think it was the summer of 1992, my mountain bike was getting dated. Suspension had come out, you know, and
Right.
front suspension had come out, and there were some cool things that I wanted. And I happened to be at the grocery store, at this little grocery store, Ideal Market in Boulder, Colorado, and there was a bike shop next door, and the KHS rep was in there talking to the owner. And when he walked out, I go, "Hey, dude," you know, it was like, "How do I get a sponsorship or something like that?" You know.
Yeah.
I'm like, you know, I laid it down. You know, I'm a pro mountain bike, a pro snowboarder, and you know, I want a bike at a discount, you know, because
Right.
I'm arrogant and a jerk,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I guess. So anyway, he said, "Oh, you know," he goes, "Do you live here?" I said, "Yeah, but I'm about to move to San Diego." And he said, "Well, when you get to San Diego, find a KHS dealer
Mm-hmm.
and ask them about the farm team. We'll give you a bike for wholesale. And then if you do 5 races, we'll give you another 10% back." I'm like,
wow.
"Sweet." You know, I knew nothing about mountain bike racing,
Yeah.
but I just wanted a deal on a bike, and I figured I'll do a couple races. It'll be good training for snowboarding probably.
Yeah.
So I moved to San Diego to work for a friend of mine, and I went to the local KHS dealer, a really nice older man, and asked him to be on the team. And he said, "That sounds great." And he
I hadn't
said,
seen you
there's-
biking or anything. You didn't like show up with race
No.
results. You're just like, "Hey, I'm a guy. Can I be on your team?"
Exactly. It was it was a great deal. I wish other companies should do this, though, because I think it was a great deal for KHS too. Because you got to remember, KHS makes the same amount of money whether they sell it to the shop or they sell it to me at a discount. You know,
Right. True.
So this really nice owner of the bike shop sets me up on the team, and he says, "Oh, by the way, there's this woman on the team named Marla. She's lived here for a while,
Mhm.
and you know, I'll introduce you to her, and she can show you the local trails." I'm like, "Cool, you know, sounds good."
Mhm.
So I met this Marla woman at the bike shop, and she was all covered in dirt like a mountain biker, you know, and you know, I was just like, okay, interesting enough. And we set up a time to meet and go for a ride. And again, remember, I knew nothing about mountain bike racing at the time.
Right.
So the guy at the shop said, "You know, this Marla woman's an expert, you know, she can probably teach you a lot and whatnot," you know, and being the young, arrogant person I was at the time, I'm like, "I'm a pro snowboarder. I used to race BMX." And back when I raced BMX, they were all just 2-foot tall tabletops on the tracks. You know, they didn't have near the skill BMX requires nowadays, right?
Mhm.
Not even close. But anyway, you know, so, and I was probably a bit sexist back then. So we set up this time to go ride, and I pick her up, and I'm hungry. So on the way there, I'm like, "Oh, look, a Taco Bell." And on the way
Great
to do this
pre-ride.
ride,
Yeah.
exactly. And she's looking at me like I'm on drugs, you know. She's like, "What are you doing?" You know. So anyway, we get to the trailhead, and she's like, "Okay, follow me," you know. And I'm like, okay, I'm like, remember, man, she thinks she's an expert. Don't hurt her ego by smashing her,
Yeah. Yeah.
So we start riding, and like most mountain bike rides, it starts with the climb. And halfway up the climb, this woman's just totally lost me. She's so far ahead of me, I can't even see her.
Yeah.
And we get to the top of the climb. Or I get to the top of the climb, and she's up there just doing circles on the little flat space on top of the climb. And she's like, "You're doing better than most of the boys." And I still to this day don't know if she was being nice or if I was actually doing better than most of the boys.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, she proceeded to kick my ass all over that ride. It was really bad for my ego, and probably great for her ego.
Right.
And probably just what I needed for my ego, actually.
Yeah.
Keep it in check a little bit. So after that, she told me about some races coming up, and she's like, you want to go with me to this race? And I said, sure. So we went to this race in Temecula, California, and I'm telling her, hey, I used to race BMX. I should probably sign up for the expert class. And this is a cross country race, by the way.
Oh, geez.
Right. And she, in the nicest way she could, she's like, Gene, it's really hard to downgrade once you upgrade. Why don't you start in beginner class? And, if you do well, you can always upgrade,
Right.
And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to smoke these poor guys. This isn't really fair, but
I'm just sandbagging here, but
yeah,
okay.
I'm totally sandbagging here. So we get to the race, and, we do the sign up and all that. And you know how they, in cross country racing, they have like staging, like all the expert 30 to 39 meet here, all the,
Mm-hmm.
So I line up with my little group of beginners, 19 to 29 or whatever the heck the age group was. And I look around, and I'm the only guy without clipless pedals. And this is 1992, remember, right?
Yeah.
Clipless pedals
Yeah.
had probably just come out in 1992.
Right.
It might be 93. Again, I don't know the exact year. But, I look around, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And then I look around, and I'm also the only guy without shaved legs. I'm like, these guys are beginners? And I started looking at their legs, and like, they've got calf muscles as big as my head, And I'm like, these guys are beginners. I'm like, uh-oh,
Yeah.
And then, so then the race starts, and we had pre-ridden the course. Marlon and I had pre-ridden that course. I think the day before, or maybe a couple of days before. So when we pre-rode the course, and I thought this was going to be like the race, on the climbs, we would chit chat.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the downhill, we would, kind of bomb the downhill to the best of our
enduro
abilities.
style.
Kind of enduro style, right? So I thought that was what racing was like, right? So, the gun goes off, and these guys with calves as big as my head, they just start sprinting as hard as they can. And I'm like, oh, it's like I'm immediately in last place. And I remember snowboard racing is a 20 to 30 second event, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've never done an endurance sport in my life, and I know I've got asthma, like I have an inhaler and everything,
Yeah.
So all of a sudden I'm going as hard as I can. And it never relented.
Yeah.
I was like, I was expecting that we'd catch our breath at some point, but no, you just go as hard as you freaking can for an hour and a half,
Yeah.
And along the way, because I guess of my old BMX riding and probably from snowboarding, I was passing a few people here and there in the downhills, and as I recall, the numbers might be a little bit off, but there were 25 riders in my little beginner class.
Mm-hmm.
And, on the way there, I'm expecting to win, by a big margin. And I got 13th out of 25, right?
Middle of the pack? Not
exact
bad.
middle of the pack, right? And honestly, it was one of the most proud days of my life in my sporting career. I mean, I'd won plenty of snowboard races, but snowboard races don't require the kind of commitment a cross-country mountain bike race does. And I had never pushed my body that hard in my life, and honestly, I didn't know you could push your body that hard and not like have a heart attack or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
mean, I was just totally naive to the whole experience. And, so yeah, I was really proud, even though I expected to win and got 13th, just the fact I didn't die was kind of being,
right.
And I beat half of those shaved leg kids with their clipless pedals. I mean, I had toe clips.
Yeah.
I mean,
Jeez.
so and regular skateboard shoes or something. Like I didn't even have any specialized shoes or anything. So anyway, that was my first race, and as much as miserable as I made it sound, it was actually a lot of fun because, like I said, I'd never pushed my body that hard.
Yeah.
And from that point on, I was just addicted. I'm like, this is freaking cool,
Yeah.
So, and Marla, it's Marla Streb, by the way. She was a pro downhill racer in the. This is before she became a pro, but she was a pro downhill racer in the 90s and early 2000s.
Oh, cool.
And so Marla, during that race, was I'll think of her name in a second. There was a factory KHS rider there. She's from Vail, Colorado. She's a really nice woman, and I can't think of her name right now. I'll think of it in a second, maybe. But anyway, Marla was trying to pass her to prove, like maybe she deserves to be on the factory team,
Yeah.
And while Marla was passing her, she broke her collarbone. She crashed and broke her collarbone. So that was my introduction to mountain bike
the
racing.
other woman?
Marla did.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So that was my introduction to mountain bike racing. I suffered more than I've ever suffered in my life. And the woman that brought me to the race, this so-called expert woman, she broke her collarbone. I'm like, this is an interesting sport.
Yeah. It almost sounds like Marla purposely didn't prepare you for that race, right? She kind of wanted you to suffer and to really
I think she saw my ego.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I really do. And I owe her for that because that was a good favor. I think we all need to be humbled a bit.
Yeah.
Or maybe not every day, but often we need to be humbled.
There are times.
Yeah. So then we did a couple more small races together, and we started going to Big Bear, which is outside of LA, up in the mountains, and in the San Gabriel Mountains. And there I did my first downhill race. And there, because of my cocky attitude, I signed up for sport instead of beginner. And
ready to move
I did okay, though. I did a lot better. I got like 5th out of 30 or something. So I'm like, okay, I probably, maybe this is better for me. And then just as a funny story, but a couple weeks after that race, where I did a cross country race on Sunday and downhill on Saturday, or vice versa, forget how it was back then. The guys at Team Big Bear invented this thing called Downhill Mania, where you're going to race 3 different downhills over the weekend, and you're going to go down 4 at a time, and the top 2 keep advancing.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So we get there, and it's raining, and I don't know, 45 degrees at the base of the mountain.
Ooh.
And then halfway up the lift, it's sleeting on us. At the very top, it's snowing.
Well, you're a snowboarder, so you're probably stoked, right?
Well, yeah, except for, I'm from Alabama. I hate cold weather. I really, really hate cold weather. And I hate wet cold weather probably the most.
Okay.
So, and I had nothing, I had my little, part of that KHS team deal was we had to, again, at wholesale prices, we had to buy a little KHS jersey and KHS shorts, okay. and this is just Lycra. Yeah. And that's all I had with me.
Oh, wow.
Right. I didn't have any of my snowboarding gear. I was in San Diego for the summer. I didn't bring my snowboard gear from Colorado.
Yeah.
That was in storage back in Colorado. So I bought some sweatpants. I thought that'd be a good idea. And that was a really bad idea because when sweatpants get really wet, they weigh like 6,000 pounds.
Right.
And they go from your waist to about your knees, which is really dangerous when you're riding downhill in the mud.
Yeah, no kidding.
So I just quit after we had to do 3 qualifying runs, I think 1 qualifying run on each track or something. And after my first qualifying run, I'm just like, this isn't fun at all. This is miserable.
Yeah.
So I quit and just cheered Marla on. And I think she either won or got second. She did quite well.
Oh, cool.
But that was pretty much my introduction to racing. And then I moved back to Colorado that winter to continue my snowboard racing. And but I was so into mountain bike racing that I bartended for a living while I was trying to make it as a snowboarder.
Mm-hmm.
So I would go out at 3 a.m. after bartending and snowshoe up Snowmass Mountain,
Wow.
and I don't know if you ever snowshoed, but it's the most pain for least amount of reward thing I've ever done in my life.
Right.
you know, but it was really fun because, it was only me and the snowcat drivers out there at 2 a.m. and everything is so still, so it was, but anyway, that's how into it I was. I did that all winter. And then the next summer I stayed in Colorado and I competed in the Corp series, the Colorado Off-Road Point series, which later was sold to Eric Jean and became the Mountain States Cup.
Okay.
And I miss those people. That was a great time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you had a lot of early success in racing, kind of your introduction, and kind of sounds like too, you're figuring it out as you go. I mean, you did have Marla, and I'm sure there were others who kind of mentored you and showed you along the way. But then it also sounds like, from what I've read, that you reached sort of a wall in terms of your own mountain bike skills development. How did you end up going about researching proper mountain bike skills?
Funny you should ask. So one of the that winter, Marla got a contract with Iron Horse.
Okay.
To race professionally, and her the main person on that team was a guy named Toby Henderson, who was one of my BMX heroes back in the day.
Yeah.
So I would ask people like Toby. I remember asking him also because we lived in San Diego. Sometimes I would ride with Mike King, just on cross country rides and stuff. But Mike King was, I don't know if you know his name, but he was one of the best American downhillers and a great BMXer before that.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike King was he's a really quiet guy, like a lot of people thought he was a jerk, but after getting to know him a little bit, he was just really, really quiet, he's just one of those people that's not very sociable. So, so anyway, I would ask him and I'd ask Toby, and they would say things like, let off the brakes, you wuss. Or, and I'm like, and I'm like, well, I tried that. And I went, I was asking specifically about cornering technique, and I asked Toby, and Toby literally said, let off the brakes, you wuss. And I'm like, I tried that and I went flying into the woods. Like that didn't work too well. So, I'm like, there has to be a technique. And so many top pros at the time said, everyone's got their own style, which was true at the time. It was definitely true at the time.
Yeah.
But being at that time, by then, I was this is quite a few, this is 4 years. This is, I turned pro in 1995, and, the story before was from 92 or 3. Okay. So, this was in, a couple years later. And by then I'd become a snowboard coach. And that's what I was doing for a living, was coaching the Steamboat Springs Winter Sports Club snowboard team. So I had learned through some of the best snowboard coaches in the world, the people that coach our U.S. snowboard team, that there might be a lot of different styles, but there's one style that wins races and all the other styles don't win races, So what you want to do is become great at this particular style. And it's not so much a style as it's a series of, techniques, basically, body position, vision. So, after asking all these pros who said everyone has their own style, and they, I'm like, okay, I'm going to figure this out for myself then, because there's got to be the right way. So I'm a bit of a nerd. So the first thing I did was I bought a bunch of mountain biking books, by great riders, like people like Ned Overend and stuff.
Yeah.
But those books weren't actually much of a help. I mean, I learned a lot about strategy and cross country racing and that sort of thing. But if you think about it, people like Ned Overend basically invented mountain biking technique. And often the people, like, if you think about it, I don't think anybody here would take a ski lesson from the guy that invented snow skiing, right? The equipment has changed a great deal, and there's been a lot of study on technique, like I'm sure whatever techniques the first skiers had, was not near what the techniques they're using to win a World Cup these days in World Cup
Right.
ski racing,
Yep.
So those books, as far as skills, they really weren't that good, and these weren't coaches. These were just really good riders. So often they have trouble explaining what they're doing also,
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
But, and if you look back at it, I always encourage my students to do this because, I'm getting pretty old, and I realize that most people have no idea nowadays what mountain biking was like in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell them to go back and go to YouTube and type in, 1996 World Cup downhill race or and I go, watch, you'll see that no one knew what they were doing with the with the exception of Nico Vulio, Nicholas Vulio. He's the nickname is the Alien, 10-time world champion.
Mm-hmm.
He knew what he was doing, and that's why he would win by 10 seconds in a downhill race.
Wow.
Often, right? So I started studying Nico, and then I realized, a very similar sport is motocross, but motocross has been around a lot longer.
Mm-hmm.
So, the people that coach it, they've studied it. They aren't like the, racers that are just figuring out the sport. They've had years of studying what works and what doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I actually learned a lot. I had 2 books. One was from Jeremy McGrath, from his coach.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one, I think, was a guy that coached Ricky Carmichael, the GOAT.
Okay.
So, I learned a lot from those motocross books. And then, and watching video of Nico, though. And you can still watch a video of Nico in 1996 and say, well, yep, he's doing, other than this one thing that I think Nathan Rennie kind of invented that I'll get to in a minute. Other than that, pretty much everything Nico was doing in 96 is still what you want to be doing. Like Nico had figured it out.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty
with
amazing.
The equipment that was available then too. I mean, I imagine that made it harder.
Oh, definitely. Our bikes were way too short. Our head angles were too steep. We had these little tiny 26-inch wheels. I don't know if you ever heard of those things, but I'm half joking, but yeah. So, and then though, there was this guy, he was one of the best downhillers in the world from Australia. And he was 18, I believe, at the time. I became somewhat friends with him. And his name's Nathan Rennie. And he went on to, he was one of the first members of the Santa Cruz Syndicate race team. And he did win the World Cup overall one year in downhill. Phenomenal athlete. I noticed in a video that he and Cedric Gracia were both doing the same thing with their hips. Like basically, at the time, I thought they were sticking their hips to the outside of the corner. Mm-hmm. What they were actually doing is letting the bike lean over while they stayed on top of the bike. But basically their hips were beside their saddle in a corner, not beneath their saddle, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
Right. So I asked Nathan why he did that. And he said, because it gives you more traction. And so I started doing it before I asked Nathan. And I realized it gave me a lot more traction. I asked Nathan about it. He would give me a few more tips because Nathan would come to the U.S. and unless Greg Menard showed up, Nathan would usually win, the U.S. national races. Mm-hmm. So Nathan was, he was crushing it back then. So it's kind of funny. I was 30. I was like, this was like 98. So I was 33 years old and I'm learning from an 18-year-old, but anyway, Nathan really helped a lot. And to this day, and, Nathan's technique is still spot on. The biggest thing Nathan did different than Nico was Nathan hinged so as his back is literally parallel to planet Earth. If that makes, instead of being more vertical to planet Earth. Yeah. And what that does is it gives you just so much negative travel in your arms, like sag in your suspension. So as you don't get yanked, like if there's a rocky corner, if your arms are straight, as your wheels go down that rock, you're going to get yanked forward. Mm-hmm. Right. If your arms are bent, all you have to do is slowly extend your arms as your wheel goes away from your body, and your upper body doesn't move at all. And he was the first one to do that and do it from top to bottom. So anyway, I owe a lot to Nathan Rennie. I learned a lot from that guy and from those motorcycle coaches.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, it sounds like you studied a number of athletes and looked even to other sports to kind of figure out what they had figured out. Were there any surprises initially or aha moments where you're like, oh wow, I never would have thought of that, or like that seems really counterintuitive?
Oh yes, two. The first one that was just mind-boggling to me was the concept of countersteering. So in both those motocross books I was telling you about, and a book by a road motorcycle coach named Keith Code. He's a very famous, the crotch rocket type racer guys.
Okay.
He coaches that. They all mentioned this thing called countersteering, and they all said that on a two-wheeled vehicle going above, and they use like 12 miles an hour, going above 12, this is the physics of how a bike turns, and we're all doing it. A lot of us just don't know that we're doing it.
Huh. Okay.
And so, I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm not countersteering, because countersteering to me is like if you've ever watched Mert Lawwell or one of the, or flat track motorcycle racing where they're going around a flat oval on the dirt, and their wheels turn to the right. Their front wheel is basically steered to the right, but they're making a left turn.
Yeah.
To me, that's countersteering, right? And I'm pretty sure my wheel wasn't doing that.
Yeah.
But then through a lot of experiments, I realized that I am countersteering. But I kind of, for my courses, I've changed the name to counter pressure, because we only truly countersteer at the initiation of a turn.
Yeah.
Once we initiate that turn, the wheel somewhat flops in. And what we're doing is, with counter pressure, we're fighting that flop. If we let the wheel flop in, our bike would stand up, and we would either high side, fly over the top of our bike, or we would go straight again, but our turn would be over. So we do use a counter steering motion to initiate the turn. And in my courses, it's also, for my students, one of the biggest aha moments. I mean, some of them know it. My students that ride motorcycles sometimes know it, but a lot of students don't. And for them, it was just like me. It was just like, it opens up just this whole other world and makes you understand cornering.
Yeah.
And, anyway, you asked me for an aha moment. That was one of them.
Yeah.
And the next one, and this to this day cracks me up. And this is why there's coaches in almost every sport. I like to use skiing as the example of this. Snow skiing, half the reason I got into snowboarding is snow skiing is the least intuitive thing I've ever done in my life. Like your instincts tell you to do the exact opposite things that you want to do on skis to ski correctly.
Yeah.
The biggest one being leaning back. When you're fearful, the human wants to move away from danger. So on snow skis, when you're going downhill, if you get nervous, you want to lean back.
Yeah.
Which is the worst thing you can do on a snow on skis or a snowboard, actually.
Yeah.
And,
I'm teaching my son how to rollerblade, and it's the same thing. He wants to lean back, and I keep saying, lean forward, lean forward.
Yeah, exactly. And leaning forward intuitively feels scary as crap. You think you're going to flip over forward. So it turns out it's the same thing on mountain biking. Like when I first turned pro, most of us would brag, even with our little 26-inch rear wheels, we would have skid marks from our tire on our butt, because that's how far back we were getting on these steep hills. But it turns out what we need to do, which does still involve your butt being behind the seat on a steep hill, but we need to keep our weight on the pedals. And I learned that from a motorcycle book. And I found when I kept my weight on my pedals that I had much more control and felt more in balance. And I remember I did a course in Bootleg Canyon, one of my downhill courses, and to get more people into the course, as I was telling you before, my friend Marla Streb was really famous. So I had her, hired her to be my assistant coach. Right. So we spent the weekend camped next to each other in a little Volkswagen vans in the parking lot. And we would coach during the day. And at night we would discuss technique, because I'd been coaching Marla off and on more with her mental game, not with her skills. And just to shout out to this person, one of the first people to coach mountain bike skills in a structured way was a woman named Blair Lombardi. And she had taught Marla. And I remember riding behind Marla and just being like, oh my gosh, like she's perfect. Like her skill, it's just spot on. I was always amazed by her skill, once she had worked with this woman, Blair Lombardi. As far as the weight on the pedals, that was the aha moment for me. I'm discussing, the course before it starts with Marla. Obviously, I need to make sure she's on the same page I am with the coaching. And I talk about, hey, I learned this cool new thing. I learned it from a motocross book. I'm trying to keep all my weight on my pegs or on my pedals,
Yeah.
And she looked at me and she laughed. She goes, oh, I've been doing that for years. And I'm like, well, thanks for telling me.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't doing that for years.
Right.
And it's one of those things, as I mentioned before, it's where the instincts get in the way. Because man, I still to this day, I'll tell my students, I've been teaching, since I started Better Ride. I started Better Ride in 99. I think I learned the weight on the pedals thing in like 2001 or something like that. But even to this day, so for 20 years, I've been teaching people to keep all their weight in the pedals, no matter what's going on, other than maybe in a manual. But it's a different story. But I still, when I get scared, the first thing that happens is that butt starts to scoot back,
right?
Because that's a human instinct to move away from danger.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter that I know to stay centered, and it doesn't matter that it somewhat matters. I've been practicing it forever because I don't get back that much, and I usually immediately catch myself and get centered again. But it just shows you how powerful our instincts are.
Right. Yeah. Well, what's the best way to counteract that? Is it just practice and constantly reminding yourself?
Yeah, exactly. And doing drills. One place I always work on weight in the pedals. Like here in Moab, I live on top of a hill. So unless I want to ride Pipe Dream, which is basically in my backyard, every other ride I do for my house, I start descending on pavement.
Okay.
That's the perfect place to work on it. Otherwise, you're bored. Right? I remember the Iron Horse Classic years ago had part of their cross country course had a downhill section on pavement. And I remember thinking, this is an abomination. Like it's okay if a climb was on pavement, maybe, but you can't have a descent in a mountain bike race on pavement.
Yeah, why waste a downhill?
It's why waste a downhill, exactly. But unfortunately, we all have probably areas where we're descending on a dirt road in a straight line and it's boring as crap, or we're descending on a little piece of pavement. Those are great places to work on it because otherwise you'd just be bored because you can't, if it's a gnarly trail and you're really focused on your weight and your pedals, you're probably not looking ahead. You're probably doing something else wrong and you're probably going to crash. So that's where so many mountain bikers make the mistake of thinking they can actually ride their bike and practice at the same time on trail.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because there's just way too much self-preservation when you're on trail kicking in, and you forget. Even with my students, I say, okay, what's our purpose? Okay. Purpose is looking through these corners. We get to the bottom. I'm like, did you look through those corners? I did the first couple, but then I got distracted and, you forget, like basketball players, if Shaquille O'Neal is on your team, you don't practice layups with Shaquille O'Neal guarding the basket.
Right.
Even though you're a pro and you've been practicing layups since you were 6 years old, you still practice with no one guarding the basket so you get the mechanics down correctly.
Yeah, you break it down.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And they might spend, 10 or 20% of their time playing against Shaquille O'Neal. But the majority of the time is doing drills.
Right.
And that's the only way to create procedural memory that just fires. Because what we want is no matter how gnarly that trail is, our body just does what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Right. And the only way to do that is to practice with an eye on perfection. If you're practicing at 80% right, you might say, dude, I'm doing it 80% right. And that does sound good.
Yeah.
But another way of saying that is you're practicing doing it 20% wrong.
Right.
So it's imperative that we spend time practicing off the trail. So we get the procedural memory. Procedural memory is like a recipe in your brain for how to do something, such as a manual.
Yeah.
Right. You've got to get that recipe wired in your brain. So it is the circuit that fires. Whenever you want that front wheel to come up while coasting, just the manual circuit fires.
Yeah.
Not the yank up on those handlebars circuit that you probably have like I did because that's what I did. When I first rode rough trails like Porcupine Rim, I would just yank the front wheel off the ground over all the bumps because it worked. Yeah. But it's terribly taxing and it throws you off balance. It's really not the best way to do it, but it does get the wheel up, And
that's a lot of us have a lot of muscle memory built up over years and years and years of doing that.
Exactly. So, and that's why even when you know and understand something, you often don't do it. Like I've had so many people come up to me and say, "Oh, you coach mountain biking? What do you teach? Do you teach this?" I go, "Yeah, so some of these I teach." And he goes, "Oh, why would I take your course? I know all that." And then I always just say, and then they do, and I know they know all that. Not everything I coach, but I know they know a fair amount of it.
Mm-hmm.
But then I always just say, I'm like, "You know all this?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I go, "Well, why aren't you doing it then?" And they're always like, "Oh, I do it." I go, "No, you don't." I'm like, "I just watched you. You don't do this." And then I'm like, "I'll break the video camera out if you want, and I'll video you. And, you tell me if you're doing what you just said you're doing,
Right.
And I'm the same way. I mean, I think we all feel like we're better than we are, if that makes sense to you. When I was a snowboarder, we were working on the half pipe one day. And I remember telling all my friends, I'm like, "Man, the first hit in that half pipe, it's awesome. I'm getting like 3 feet out, meaning I'm getting 3 feet above the half pipe."
Yeah.
And they all looked at me, all my friends would look at me kind of quizzically, and I'm like, "They're just jealous." You know what I mean? But they gave me this look like, "You're not getting 3 feet out." And I'm just like, "They're just jealous, because I'm so damn good." Yeah. And then that evening we watched the video and I was getting maybe 6 inches out of that half pipe.
Right.
But it sure as heck felt like I was getting 3 feet out of that half pipe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think a lot of us, because we know, and this is one of the biggest things I try to instill in my students, just because you know something means almost nothing. You have to be able to put what you know into action. Mm-hmm. And you need to be able to put it in action on the gnarliest of trails. If you're looking down while you're riding a pretty boring dirt road, you're probably going to get away with it. Like, you might go a little slower than you would if you're looking ahead, but you're probably not going to crash or anything.
Right.
But if you're looking down in that rooty, rocky, gnarly section, then there's going to be a problem.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, everything needs to be ingrained so much that we can do it in the nastiest of conditions, and we're not thinking about doing it. Our body just does it.
Right. Yeah, you make a good point. And I think, was it Yoda that said knowing is not doing? I mean, like that's just because you know it doesn't mean you do it. And we're all human. I mean, we can point to any number of examples in our lives where it's like we know healthy foods to eat, but do we always eat healthy foods? No. So
and it shows you the power of habit, right?
Exactly.
Because I'm marrying a woman who has a 12-year-old daughter who I love. Clara hates when I curse. Mm-hmm. So I do my best to not curse in front of her, but I still curse in front of her because it's a habit.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then I'm always apologetic and I catch myself. But that's the thing. Like, I know not to cuss in front of my daughter, even if she didn't find it so offensive, it's just not a good thing you want to teach your child.
Right.
It's like, but I still do it because it's a habit. I mean, I'm getting better. Again, with practice, I'm getting better, but that's, I think we got a little bit off topic there, but that's,
No, these are life lessons. Well,
but
two of the concepts that you mentioned so far, body positioning, and you also talked about cornering and about steering. Another thing that I feel like you incorporate into your training and your coaching is this idea of conservation of momentum on the trail. So, can you talk a little bit about that? Like how do you see sort of maximizing speed while minimizing your effort?
this is an excellent topic. And it's interesting too, because, you asked, a lot of my students sign up so they can learn to ride faster.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've gotten older and some of my students have gotten older, that's not even true so much. I think most of my students sign up because they want to be more confident and have more fun.
Okay.
But a good percentage, still want to get faster. Well, excuse me. I think everyone wants to get faster, but they don't want to get recklessly faster, if you know what I mean. Like they
Right.
would love, if they could do this cross country ride in 2 hours instead of 2.5, they would love that, but they don't want to, risk their neck to do that. If
Yeah.
that makes sense to you,
Yeah.
you
Or
know?
maybe they see their buddies, right? I mean, a lot of us,
Yeah,
ride with others in group rides and we feel like, oh, I don't want to be the slowest guy in the bunch. And you look at other people and you're like, how are they able to, beat me down the hill so badly all the time? What am I doing
it's
wrong here?
exactly, and I read a lot of philosophy, and one of my one of the most interesting things that I still struggle with a little bit is the concept that there is no good and there is no bad. It's just what we label
Hmm.
things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is a great example. As I mentioned, I have asthma. That, for a mountain bike racer, that's a pretty horrible thing to have. But boy, for a coach, what a wonderful thing to have, because I realized I wasn't going to outpedal anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, I raced cross. For those listening that weren't around mountain biking in the '90s, everyone did everything. Like
Right.
if you signed up for a race on the same bike, you would often do a hill climb, downhill, and a cross country race. And right before I got into the sport, it kind of died right about the time I got in the sport. They
Mm-hmm.
often had trials competitions.
Oh,
So
right.
literally, you would do a trials competition, a cross country race, a downhill, and maybe a hill climb in the same weekend on the same bike,
Wow.
which is pretty awesome. Honestly, I kind of wish it was still that way, because there was
Yeah.
a lot more intermixing of tribes, kind of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now it's
Yeah.
like, the downhill tribe and the enduro tribe and the cross country tribe, and they kind of don't even know each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is it's kind of sad. So anyway, I realized I wasn't going to outpedal people, so I had to become more efficient.
Mm.
And I was out riding with a buddy of mine. We were both sport cross country racers at the time, as well before I started coaching and mountain biking. And we were on a trail probably a lot of listeners are familiar with. It's called Mary's Loop and Lions Loop in Fruta, Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And we were out on Lions. And my buddy, he always beat me, not by much, but I mean, he would definitely beat me by, 2 or 3 minutes in an hour and a half race, which actually is a fair amount of time, I guess. He realized that on this kind of tricky section that had a lot of little short ups and downs and a lot of little corners, that he was in my way, And so
Mm-hmm.
finally he's just like, am I in your way? You can go ahead. And I'm like, okay, which I thought was odd because this guy's way fitter than me.
Yeah.
And after he let me go ahead, after about 2 minutes, I turn around and he's way the heck back there.
Yeah.
He's just way back there. And so I started realizing that, my background growing up with the two biggest things I loved growing up were skateboarding and BMX. And then I got into snowboarding when I was in
Mm-hmm.
my 20s. And through all three of those sports, I learned how to work with the terrain to my advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Pumping, contouring, which is kind of like pumping, but you're not using as much energy. You're not trying to gain speed. You're trying to just keep the wheels on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And I started watching my buddy, and I realized he was so incredibly stiff on that bike. Like literally, whatever the bike did, he did. Which means if his rear wheel suddenly gained 2 feet, his head and chest suddenly gained 2 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not very efficient. It takes a lot of strength or a lot of energy to move, someone's head, chest, and hips up 2 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
Whereas on the same little 2-foot bump, my hips weren't moving because I was just sucking it up with my legs and my arms, and then there's so many little things like that will make you so much more efficient on the bike. And one big thing, though, is looking ahead. And it's so funny because it's the most over talked about and underutilized thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, everybody knows to look ahead.
Right.
And 90% of mountain bikers, I believe, think they are looking ahead. But if you watch, they're simply not. I mean, it's really sad. I was at the I think it was 2010 or 2011 national championships were in at Sol Vista, Colorado, which is now Granby Ranch. And at the cross country race, there were these 3 wide open, I mean, we're talking like 50-foot radius corners that had a small berm on them. And I watched as the 3 guys who got first, second, and third in the national championship cross country race came through those corners. And because they were all looking about 3 feet in front of their front wheel, which gives you the perception of going very, very fast, they were all dragging their brakes. And I promise you, they, you, me, we could all sprint at those corners at a full gallop and not brake at all and make it through those corners as long as we were looking through, even with no good cornering skill. They just weren't challenging corners.
Yeah.
And I timed it. So, I videoed these guys and I timed it. I put my video camera up and then I did it myself. And it took them, my numbers, remember this is 10 years ago, but it took them, let's say, 7 seconds to get through those corners, the 2 corners combined.
Yeah.
It took me like 4. But not only did it only take me 4, I was using less energy. It takes a lot of energy to brake because you're resisting. When you're braking, your body wants to continue to accelerate. So you have to brace yourself against the bike so you slow at the same rate the bike does.
Right.
So that takes energy. Secondly, I don't know. I didn't have a radar gun, but I exited that last corner probably going twice as fast as they did.
Right.
Which means I covered that next straightaway at twice the speed they did while using less energy because they probably got on the pedals and sprinted across that straightaway. I probably did that straightaway faster than them, and I didn't pedal one bit. And you can see how that adds up all the way around a race course or just a track, a trail you're riding. It doesn't have to be a race course. And, it's amazing because I guarantee in my cross-country race courses that you'll shave 2 minutes an hour off of your times. Like you can use Strava to test this.
Yeah.
And I had a student, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, tell me on the Sunday of the course, he's like, Gene, I pretty much knew everything you've said in this course. I learned a little bit, but I've got a 6-hour drive home and I don't want to drive at night. So I'm going to leave at noon. Right. And I'm like, okay, and he takes off and I'm thinking, okay, that's one of the students that's going to ask me for his money back on Monday. No biggie, it happens. Right. I'd be explaining something and he was looking off in the distance, not even looking at me, not even paying attention half the course, So anyway, sure enough, it wasn't Monday after the course. It was Tuesday after the course. I get an email from the guy. And he was a, serious expert Cat 1 cross-country racer in his 30s or in his 40s, I think. And for those that don't know, the 40 and over Cat 1 class is the most cutthroat, badass racers. Because if you're still racing cross-country over 40, you're a freaking stud. Like there's no easy pickings. Like, well, at least I'll beat these 4 guys. You know what I mean? It's like, no, you're, like you got to be on your A game. Yeah. So this guy, like a smart cross country racer, this guy used Strava. He used a heart rate monitor and a power meter, to track his progress. And one of the few times he was paying attention in my course, we were talking about it's great, and I recommend this to everyone listening. It's great if you have a loop that you do near your house fairly consistently. It can, because it's great for testing things. You can use Strava or a little stopwatch and say, okay, my best lap is an hour, or 1 hour, 1 minute and 30 seconds, or whatever. Write that down. And then you say, I'm going to try less tire pressure, see if I'm faster, see if I'm slower, and then do it again,
Yeah.
especially if you have a heart rate monitor and or a power meter, because then you can try to maintain the same power and the same heart rate throughout the ride, and see if you got faster or slower.
Yeah.
So this guy had a course like that. So, and in the course, he had told me, he goes, yeah, man, my record is 1 hour, 1 minute and 20 seconds, I think is what he said, something to that effect. So anyway, I get this email from him on the Tuesday after my course ended on Sunday. This is the Tuesday after the course. And he said, hey, I wasn't really too stoked on your course. I paid a lot of money, and, thought I knew most of that.
Yeah.
But I decided, since I paid $800, I was going to use your vision techniques today and do that loop I told you about. And by the way, the vision techniques, a lot of what I teach, I've got to give credit. I learned from Keith Code, the motorcycle coach I told you about earlier.
Yeah.
So he went out and used those techniques. And he said, Gene, you told me when you're looking ahead, it feels like you're going slower. And, because, man, sure enough, I felt like I was going slower. The whole, pretty much the whole ride, I felt like I was going a little slower than I usually do. And, my heart rate monitor data and my power meter data backed that up. I wasn't using my normal amount of power, and, my heart rate was a little lower than normal. But, I paid $850 for that course. I'm going to give this a good test. And he goes, so I kept focusing on, looking ahead, using the vision techniques you taught me. And, I got done. And again, I looked at the power meter, looked at my heart rate monitor while my Strava was loading. And I was a little disappointed, because they were both, lower than normal, not way lower. I don't remember the exact percentage, but, they were lower than normal. And then he said, and then the Strava finally loaded and it said 56 minutes.
Oh, geez. Wow.
So the next sentence cracked me up. So I guess your stuff might work. Except he used a different word for stuff, I think.
Right.
Right. And that blew me away, honestly. I did not think, especially remember, this is his first day practicing those techniques. He's probably not particularly good at those vision techniques. I did not expect a really close to 10% time savings. I expected a 3 to 5% time saving, but he saved 10%.
Yeah, geez.
And I watch so many American down cross country racers that, I mean, they've got to be as fit as those European racers. Well, why do they always get 10th place?
Yeah.
Or 11th place at World Cups, as their best finish. And a lot of it to me is they just don't have great technique. And unfortunately, and I'll say this as someone who fights with his ego constantly, their egos just get in the way. Because, I mentioned those guys that got top 3 at Sol Vista at the national championships. I found 2 of them after the race. And I approached them and said, hey, congratulations, great job. I was watching you ride today, and I noticed a few things that, you could improve on that would definitely save you some time.
Sure, that went over well.
Oh, God, it went over, like a fart in church, I mean, it was... they took great offense to this. And, and I prefaced it with I'm a coach, I'm a professional downhill racer. This is what I do.
Yeah. And you started with congratulations. So
and I started with congratulations. I mean, I did my best to not come off as I know everything and you suck or something, because they obviously didn't suck. They just got the top 3 finishes, in the national championships. One of them was a national champion. But it blew me away that, and this is a big difference between European mountain bike racers and American mountain bike racers, and probably almost any other country, South African mountain bike racers even, is In every other country, they're looking for the smallest edge. They're looking for any edge.
Yeah.
Oh, if I eat, 4 kiwi fruit before the race, I'm going to go faster. I'll try that. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
they're looking for any edge. And here I was offering these people an edge, and they didn't want to hear about it.
Yeah. Huh.
And it's and I do understand, mountain biking is a very do-it-yourself sport,
Hmm.
and we're very do-it-yourself country.
Right.
Everyone, everyone wants to feel like they did it on their own. And people will
Hmm.
tell me that, Gene, you started Better Ride on your own, dude. That's your business. You should be really proud. And I am really proud, but I didn't do it on my own. No one, I mean, I use the roads my tax dollars and your tax dollars pay for, to get to places. I used BLM land that I have permits for. Nathan Rennie helped me. Cedric Gracia helped me. Like I said, all these people helped me. I
Hmm.
didn't do it on my own.
Right.
Like Greg Menard didn't become who he is on his own.
Right.
It's mostly Greg. And Greg deserves all the praise he gets because he is a phenomenal person, and 90% of it is his personal drive to win and blah blah blah.
Hmm.
But he's received a boatload of help along the way, and I think he would acknowledge. I know he would acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm off in left field again. But it's sad to me because the only course I have right now that isn't selling well is my cross country race course.
Huh.
And no one needs this more than cross country racers.
Right.
You
That's
know,
interesting.
because they race the longest, so a
Hmm.
small percent of difference can make the biggest gain for them.
Yeah.
Than it would in a downhill race. I mean,
Right.
1% faster in a downhill race in a 2-minute race is barely a second. Because that's
Hmm.
120 seconds. A 1% difference in a 2-hour race is a massive difference.
Right.
You know,
Yeah. Yep.
Even better, a 5 or in the case of that one student of mine, a 10% difference the day after my course.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, yeah. I mean, even as you found in the early '90s, racing is competitive. Even at every
Oh yeah.
level. And if
It's
you want to win, there you gotta put in the work. And it's interesting too. The student you mentioned that saw such a big improvement just from focusing on vision. I think a lot of us too. It's like we may be really good at some of the skills, but then there's like that one thing that's like really, really holding us back. And yeah, you'll never know what that is until you break it down and start working on each of the parts kind of individually.
yeah. I mean, again, just like in snow skiing, when I started to learn how to do everything correctly before, when I was a pro, before I started Better Ride, you know, almost everything that's intuitive is wrong. So, I've had so many students that have been riding. Like, I don't know if you know who Bryson Martin is. Bryson Martin Sr. Owns and started DVO suspension.
Okay.
And his son, Bryson Martin Jr., was a pro motocrosser and a pro downhill racer. So he took one of my courses from me. And at the time, Bryson Martin owned Tenneco USA, which was basically Marzocchi USA.
Hmm.
And Bryson said, "Hey, can I sit in? I'll be on my phone doing business a lot, but when I'm not on my phone, can I sit in on the course?" And I'm
Hmm.
thinking, "You own Marzocchi, yes, you can sit in. This might be good for me,
Right. Right.
So, and I didn't know this, but Bryson has been mountain biking since the '80s,
Oh, wow.
and Bryson is a badass. Like he will whip my tail in a cross country race,
Hmm.
or probably an enduro type race. If, downhill, I'm sure I'd beat him. Well, I'm not sure, but I think I'd beat him. But he can definitely, out pedal me. And he'd been riding for 30 years. And at the end of the course, he was like, "Thank you for finally teaching me how to ride after 30 years.
Oh,
I
wow.
was doing so much wrong, you know?"
Hmm.
And that was just, one of the proudest moments of my career, really, when you have someone with his background say that. But I've had so many students say that. And again, I'm not bragging about my coaching. I'm just bragging about coaching in general in anything that you do. If you go out and play
Mm-hmm.
golf every day, and meanwhile I'm taking lessons, right now you might be able to whip my butt. But in 2 years, if I took 2 years of golf lessons, at the end of those 2 years, I'm going to be way better than somebody that's a self-taught golfer. I guarantee you that.
Right. Yeah.
And the difference with mountain biking is kind of dangerous. Golf's not so dangerous.
Right.
Whereas mountain biking is pretty dangerous. So it's just one of those things that, if we could be more like the Europeans and go, wow, I know a lot about this sport, but I bet there's some stuff I don't know. And maybe there's some stuff I do know that I'm not doing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I should look into this before, anyone listening thinks I'm just trying to sell my product. If you look at my schedule, most of my courses sell out already. I don't really need any more business.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to help people. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And this is a great way to get better, at anything that you do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, this is part one of our conversation with Gene. Be sure to tune in next week for the second part of our interview. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.